In order for you to make the best selections inside of Photoshop, it's important to understand all of the options that are available to you with your selection tools. What I'd like to do in this video is review exactly what anti-aliasing does for you when you make a selection. So I'm going to start off by coming over and choosing the rectangular marquee tool. With this tool selected, you'll notice that anti-alias, the option, is not available within the options bar. It's grayed out, so you can't choose it. But let's look at why you can't choose it. If you come over and click and drag out a square or a rectangle, doesn't really matter, Shift will constrain it to a square as you're dragging. If you don't hold down the Shift key, you'll get a rectangle. Once you create the selection, I want you to fill it with a color. In this case, black is my foreground color. So what I'd like you to do, in this case, is fill it with black. I can do that by holding down the Option key on the Mac and pressing the Delete key on the keyboard. That will fill the selection with the foreground color. The keyboard equivalent on the Windows side would be Alt Backspace. Once you fill that selection, you can go ahead and deselect it. Command D on the Mac, Control D on Windows. Then what I'd like you to do is zoom in to this bottom right corner of the shape. Now you can access the zoom tool when you have any other tool selected, other than the type tool, by holding down the space bar and the command key on the Mac. It would be space bar control on Windows. Just click and hold down and you'll zoom in to that corner. Now as you zoom in, you'll eventually see the pixel grid. The pixel grid is showing you the individual pixels within this image. Now in order for us to create something like a square or a rectangle, you'll notice that we're filling pixels, in this case, with black color. Now when you get to the end of the shape, the last pixel will be black, the one next to it will be white. The white, of course, is the canvas color. So when you're working with straight edges, you get nice, crisp selections. But the reality is, when you're working inside of Photoshop, rarely are you going to be working with a nice straight edge. And that's where anti-aliasing comes in. So what I'd like you to do is double-click the Zoom tool here in the Tools panel to return the magnification back to 100%. And then I'd like you to come up to the File menu, and from the File menu, you can choose Revert. Once you revert the document, you'll get rid of that rectangle or square that you created. Now we want to take a look at what happens when you're not working with the straight edge, so something like an ellipse or a circle. So you can come over to the Tools panel and choose the elliptical marquee tool. In this case, I don't want you to select the anti-alias option. Keep that deselected. Then what you can do is click and drag out a circle by holding down the Shift key. Once you create your selection, you can fill it with the foreground color again. Here on the Mac, it's Option Delete. It would be Alt Backspace on Windows. Then you can go ahead and deselect this object, Command D or Control D. And again, let's zoom into the edge. We can do that by holding down the keyboard shortcut Spacebar Command on the Mac. It would be Spacebar Control on Windows. Click and hold down, and you'll begin to zoom in. And as you zoom in, you can see what happens. We get this stair-stepping. We get jagged edges. Because ultimately, if we have a solid color for this particular shape, it has to end on a square. Pixels are square, and you can't fill half a square, at least not in Photoshop. A pixel is one object, and you either fill it or you don't, and this is the result of that edge. So if we come back to 100%, again, double-click the Zoom tool, make a similar selection, but this time choose Anti-Alias. When you choose Anti-Alias, we'll go ahead and click and drag out another circle. Hold down the Shift key, of course, to constrain the selection. Once you have the active selection, you can fill it with the foreground color. Option Delete on the Mac, Alt Backspace on Windows. Go ahead and deselect it. Once you deselect it, choose the Zoom tool again and zoom in to this shape. Now as we zoom in, you'll notice you get a completely different appearance on the edge. Here we have this jagged edge because we're either using black pixels or we're not, and we essentially have these black pixels against a white canvas, so this is why it's so jagged. But here, on the shape that's anti-aliased, you'll see that we have transitionary pixels between the foreground color and the background color, which ultimately are producing some gray values. These gray values will create the illusion of a nice, crisp edge when looking at it at 100%. It's nice and smooth. Opposed to this, even at 100%, you can still see that it's jagged. So that is what anti-aliasing does for you. Now, not all situations require anti-aliasing, but as you can see, if you're working with curves and something other than a straight line, the end result will typically look a little bit better if you are in fact working with the anti-alias option.